Borka, The Adventures of a Goose with No Feathers by Burningham. Once upon a time there were two geese called Mr. and Mrs. Plumster. They lived on a deserted piece of marshland near the east coast of England, where their ancestors had once lived many years before. There they built their nest and laid their eggs. Each spring the Plumsters came back to the marshes and mended their nest. Then Mrs. Plumster settled down to lay her eggs, and Mr. Plumster kept guard. He hissed at anything that came near the nest. Sometimes he hissed even if there was nothing in sight. It made him feel important. Then the eggs began to hatch. One fine spring morning there were 6 baby Plumsters in the nest. Mr. Plumster was delighted and he invited his friends round to celebrate. The young geese were given names. They were Frida, Archie, Jennifer, Oswald, Timothy and Borka. Now all geese look very much alike when they are young, but right from the start there was something odd about Borka. Borka had a beak, wings and webbed feet like all her brothers and sisters, but she did not have any feathers. Mr. and Mrs. Plumster were very worried about this. They called in the Dr. Goose, who came along with his little leather bag. The doctor examined Borka carefully and said there was nothing wrong with her except that she did not have any feathers. A most unusual case, he went on, and he thought for a long while. Then he told Mrs. Plumster that there was only one thing to do. She must knit some feathers for Borka. So Mrs. Plumster got out her knitting needles and set to work. Of course she could not knit real feathers, but she made a kind of grey woolen jersey as much like feathers as she could. When she had finished, she called Borka and tried it on her. Borka was delighted and flapped around with joy because she had always been chilly at night. She went and showed the other young geese, but they just laughed at her. This made her very unhappy, and she went into a patch of tall reeds and cried. Now by this time the other young geese were learning to fly and to swim properly, but Borka did not like joining in because the others teased her, and so she got very behind with her lessons. Nobody noticed that she was not attending. Mr. and Mrs. Plumster were far too busy. Borka did try to learn to swim, but whenever she went into the water, her jersey took such a long time to dry afterwards that she soon gave up. By now the summer was almost over. The weather was getting cooler and the geese were becoming restless. At this time of year they always went to a warmer land where it was easier to find food. The Plumsters began getting ready to leave. They covered their nest with twigs and rushes to keep it safe through the stormy winter. Then one day it became really cold and wet. The geese shivered and knew it was time for them to go. They chose one wise old goose to lead them and they all flew away. But Borka did not go. She could not fly. Instead she went and hid and watched them leave. Nobody noticed that she was missing. They were all too busy thinking of the journey ahead. As the geese disappeared into the grey sky, tears trickled down Borka's beak. She did not know what to do. It was drizzling, and she wandered off, hoping to find a dry place for the night. It was already getting dark when she came to a line of boats moored in the estuary. Borka chose one that had no lights on board, and she walked up the gangplank. She was just going down into the hold of the boat when there was a loud bark. A dog came rushing out, which gave Borka a terrible fright. But the dog, seeing it was only a goose, stopped barking and introduced himself. He was called Fowler. Borka explained that she only wanted to stay under cover for the night, so Fowler showed her into a part of the hold where there was some old sacks for her to lie on. She was so tired that she fell asleep almost at once. Now the boat, which was called the Crombie, belonged to Captain McAllister. Late that night, he and his mate, whose name was Fred, came back, and they decided to sail early in the morning before it was light. Fowler forgot all about Borka, who was still asleep in the hold. It was not until they were well on their way that he remembered and told the captain. "Well, well," said Captain McAllister, "a goose on board. She'll have to work her passage if she's coming with us to London." Borka was soon very friendly with the captain, Fred, and of course with Fowler. She coiled pieces of rope with her beak, picked up crumbs from the floor, and helped in any way she could. In return, she was given plenty of good food. At last the Crombie steamed into the Thames and they were nearing London. Captain McAllister began to wonder what to do with Borka when they got there. He decided to leave her in Kew Gardens, which is a large park where lots of geese live all the year round. When they came to the place where the river flows past Kew Gardens, Captain McAllister lifted Borka over the railings and put her with the other geese. She was sorry to say goodbye to her friends, but they promised to come and visit her on their next trip to London. The geese at Kew did not mind that Borka had no feathers. There were already so many strange kinds of birds in the gardens. Nobody laughed at her grey woolen jersey, and all the geese were very friendly, especially one called Ferdinand. Ferdinand cared for Borka and taught her to swim really well. She is still living there happily, and whenever Captain McAllister and Fred and Fowler come to London, they call in to see her. So if you are in Kew Gardens at any time and you see a goose who looks somehow different from the others, it might well be Borka. The end.